Good evening to you all. We are now on the second Sunday of Lent. And the Gospel on the second Sunday of Lent is on the Transfiguration of our Lord Jesus Christ. But we will also talk about the first reading as well. So for the readings for today, allow me to give you 3 quick points for reflection. The first point is this: faith entails trusting in God even when we do not understand. When we look at Abraham in the first reading, we remember that God called Abraham from the land of the Chaldeans. So he told Abraham, "Leave the land of your ancestors and go to a land that I will show you. And I will make you a father of a people." And so Abraham, who was very obedient to the Lord, even though he was advanced in age, he said, "Okay, I will relocate because you said so." So he left the land of the Chaldeans. And true enough, in his old age, Abraham gained a son, Isaac. So this son was a sign of the fulfillment of God's promise. And I'm sure Abraham loved his son Isaac so much. But then we see in the first reading today, God makes a request. God asks Abraham to sacrifice his son. So can you imagine, no? Abraham must have been confused and troubled. How can God fulfill His promise if I sacrifice my son? And yet, even if he did not understand, he obeyed God. He trusted God. And of course, at the last moment, God stopped Abraham from killing his son. Perhaps the Lord wanted to tell Abraham that unlike the Chaldeans who practice human sacrifice, it would never be a practice condoned by the God of love. But the point is, since Abraham obeyed, even when he did not understand, God saw his fidelity and he was greatly rewarded. He was promised, "Your descendants will be as numerous as the stars and as many as the sands in the beach of the sea." Sometimes we are like that. We are asked to trust the Lord even when we do not understand. I remember a friend of mine who was very active in church. He was active in the church choir. He was serving in the ministry. And he was very happy before the pandemic because he was given this new job. It was a very good opportunity, a promotion where he will be a boss with a lot of employees under him. So he was very happy. But then the pandemic came. And suddenly, here he was in a new job, in a new position, still having to prove himself. And then the pandemic made it very difficult, the business very difficult. And he had more employees this time. So he was questioning God. Why did you give me this new opportunity if I'm just going to be struggling in this time of pandemic? And he could see that many of his employees were also afraid of losing their jobs. They were struggling. And so what he did was he organized some spiritual activities, some Bible sharing. He sent the online mass links to his employees. Together they would pray. And suddenly his employees started to become closer to God. And they were telling him that it was a big help in this time of pandemic that they had their faith to rely on. And suddenly, it hit him. God put me in this position, on time, in charge of all of these people, because He wanted to talk to them. and assure them of His love. God used me as His instrument. And so, faith entails trusting in God even when we do not understand. So can we ask ourselves, how can I obey God fully, trusting that God will never ask something that would be bad for me? What is the second point? The second point is this. In order to see the glory, we have to climb mountains first. We see in the Gospels and in our readings that mountains are places of encounter with God. In the first reading, we see Abraham on Mount Moriah. In the second reading, it speaks of Christ's sacrifice on Mount Calvary. And in our Gospel, we talk about the transfiguration on Mount Tabor. Mountains are encounters, places of encounter with God. But have you ever climbed a mountain? Hindi ko alam kung ilan sa inyo ay nagma-mountain climbing. A friend of mine posted on Facebook recently, naging matapang siya. Sabi, aakyatin namin itong bundok na ito. And then halfway through, parang ayaw na niya. Sabi niya, ang hirap-hirap naman ito. Bakit ko pinahihirapan ang sarili ko? If you go up a mountain, it is arduous. It is difficult. And at times, it is painful. But to reach the top, the summit, brings peace, consolation, joy, and happiness. You see, the transfiguration happened not on the way up. It happened at the summit. If the disciples stopped midway, they would never have seen the transfiguration. And we only see the glory when we are willing to make that sacrifice to encounter God. Naalala ko, every year I would go to Luneta to witness the night before the Feast of the Black Nazarene. And every time I would pass through the area in front of the Luneta Grandstand, I would see all of the devotees there early in the evening, lined up to touch the Nazareno. And they would stay there for 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours, lining up there just in order to touch the Nazareno. But that sacrifice is worth it when they are able to encounter Jesus Himself. Naalala ko rin yung iba nang kikwento sa akin, mga parishioners ko dati. They went to Europe to do the Camino de Compostela. I don't know if you know about that, no? Yung ikaw ay maglalakad sa Europe ng 1 month. Maglalakad-lakad ka lang doon. Parang yun yung pilgrimage mo to encounter the Lord. So it's very difficult. They were saying it was very difficult. But they were also saying it was the most spiritual experience that they ever had in their life. So sometimes, we have to climb the mountain to be able to see the glory. And this Lenten season, these 40 days are a climbing of the mountain. Perhaps on Fridays, we do the way of the cross. Perhaps we join in the holy hour. Perhaps we fast seriously and abstain on Fridays. It is all very difficult. But we do all of that in order to see God. But sometimes our climbing is not voluntary. Sometimes we have the pain of grief, the pain of loss of a loved one. And we are struggling. We are groping with the loss. We are mourning. But we keep in mind that the journey is not the end. There is glory that awaits us who persevere. And it's good to ask ourselves, what mountain am I being asked to climb this season of Lent to encounter God more closely? Third and last point for us today, there are glimpses of the glory of God in every person. So we see that the transfiguration totally changed the perception of the three apostles, Peter, James, and John, and how they looked at Jesus. Before this event, they have been with Jesus for almost 3 years, every single day. And he seemed like an ordinary human person. Of course, he would make miracles. He would be a great preacher, maybe a superhuman, but he still looked like an ordinary human person. But this event, the transfiguration, changed all that. Because in these few moments, they saw a glimpse of his divinity. They saw a glimpse of his future glory. And that gave them hope in the coming days of darkness as Jesus entered his passion and death. But you know, what happened to these three apostles can happen to us as well. People around us who we live with, who we work with, who we see every day, seem normal and ordinary. We take them for granted until one day something happens. And then suddenly we look at them with fresh eyes and we see them in a way that we have never seen them before. Then we are moved, we are touched, and that is nothing short of a glimpse of the glory of God. One time a parishioner approached me. She said, "Father, I have a little something that I want to give your janitor." I said, "Why are you giving my janitor a little something?" "Because, Father, one time I visited the parish and I saw your janitor and he was cleaning the building with pride. Naglilinis siya at hindi niya ikinahihiya yung kanyang ginagawa. And I was seeing this person who was proud of what he was doing. And I was moved. And I want to give this little something because I want him to know that I appreciate him." See, very, very ordinary day, very ordinary person. But that parishioner saw a glimpse of God in him. I remember before when I was still a deacon, I was serving under a parish priest. And one day, we were out there, we were talking outside the parish. And we saw the parish priest come out of the rectory. Hindi niya kami nakikita. And then some street children approached the parish priest. And instead of ignoring the street children, this parish priest embraced them. He embraced them. And so yung mga kasama ko, natulala. Sabi nila, "Wow, your parish priest is a saint." So nakita nila the glory of God in this simple priest. And so it happens around us. No? What we have to do is to open our eyes to how it is happening. And so it's good to ask ourselves, what is it in the person beside me that reminds me of God's beauty? And so, 3 points for our reflection today. Number 1, faith entails trusting in God even when we do not understand. Number 2, in order to see the glory, we have to climb mountains first. And number 3, there are glimpses of the glory of God in every person. And so I leave you with the 3 questions that you can reflect on. Perhaps after this Mass, you can take some time out to answer any of these questions. The first question is this: how can I obey God fully, trusting that God will never ask something that would be bad for me? Second question, what mountain am I being asked to climb this season of Lent to encounter God more closely? And third, what is it in the person beside me that reminds me of God's beauty? Let us spend a few moments in silence to reflect on the gospel.